Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I think you probably heard Ken mention it before. We sort of bounce around ideas every year about what have we talked about in previous years and what we haven't talked about. And I sort of threw out the idea of night spraying because I don't know that I've ever spoke to a group about that, and I don't know how many conversations you guys have had about night spraying. And then I've known Don for many years, and there was actually Don down at this field school, 5-6 years ago. That actually showed up a little bit late in the morning, and I said, I was giving him a hard time for showing up late, and he says, I just finished spraying. I was spraying all night long. And so I said, really? And so then we chatted about that a little bit, and so I'm very happy that Don is here to sort of, talk about his experiences on the farm and sort of the practical nature of this. And I'll sort of start off with maybe a little bit of why it may or may not be a good idea to spray at night. So first of all, I'd like a show of hands. How many people in the crowd do spray at night from time to time? So there's been more. I've asked this question 3 days in a row, and there's always a few more hands than I expect. How many people think it's a totally crazy idea? So you're just being shy, because I know there's a few of you out there that probably think it is a crazy idea. So the other question I'll ask is, how many people are doing it herbicides only, or are they doing insecticides and fungicides as well? You want to just, what's that? Fungicide treatments? Some people are doing both. So. And then when we get into sort of with Don talking, we sort of ask him about, is there a time of year, is he doing this sort of early in the spring, or is he doing it in the middle of the crop year as well, in terms of when he might be doing it. So I guess I'll ask again from the audience, just before I get into, my part of it a little bit, is maybe a few of you that are doing it, why are you doing it? There's a couple of hands over here. So why are you spraying at night? So wind is an obvious one, I think, in southern Alberta.
Get away from the heat of it. Humidity.
The heat of the day, and you brought up the humidity. Okay. Anything else? And just a time factor, which is very important. So we all have larger farms, and I think more and more we seem to be fighting the weather. I don't know. Like even in my research program, it's just been brutal the last 3 years to try and get things seeded on time, and then we're late seeding, so then we know we're late spraying, and then everything gets backed up for the whole year. So we'll talk a little bit about why there could be some advantages and disadvantages for this first, if we go to the night spraying. And I want to sort of break it into a couple different components. For a herbicide to work, one of the first things that has to happen, obviously, I guess it has to get onto the plant, so you have to get coverage. But the first main thing that happens is you have to get absorption into the plant. And then after it's in the plant, most of our herbicides are systemic. They have to move within the plant, so they have to translocate within the plant. And those are somewhat two different processes, and they happen in quite different mechanisms. So the first one, in terms of absorption, it's quite a bit about droplet drying time. So we spray that droplet on the leaf surface, and the longer that herbicide stays in solution in that spray droplet, the more time there is for it to penetrate the wax layer and the cuticle layer that's on the leaf. And so we have more potential to get more uptake into the plant. And so that's the first thing that is really required and for a herbicide to work. So at nighttime, the first thing that happens, if it's a little bit cooler, we have a little more humidity or a little bit moisture in the air, that cuticle will be more hydrated. And if you've heard me speak on this subject before, the cuticle is like a sponge. So when it's very dry, it's sort of compressed, and it'll be sort of skinny like that. As soon as we get a little humidity, a little water into it, it becomes fatter. It gets more porous. In fact, those pores become more open. So the herbicide can sort of weave its way through those diverse channels and get into the cells below the cuticle and below the wax. And that's true even for contact herbicides. We say they just have to hit the leaf and burn the leaf. That's not actually technically true. They still have to get through the wax layer in the cuticle and get to the cell underneath that to actually have the killing effect on the plant. So if we have it staying in solution because the temperatures are cooler, the wind speed is lower, we don't have the sunlight that's drying it out, those are all reasons why we might get a little more uptake. The other one is that many of our herbicides are broken down by UV radiation. And what we've largely done to counteract that is we've come up with a good adjuvant system, a good surfactant, which just increases the uptake into the plant enough that it sort of negates that problem. So a prime example of that would be when Post was registered in 1982. It was initially registered with a non-ionic surfactant, and we realized as researchers right away that we could measure a 30 to 50% reduction in the activity of Post within about 45 to 60 minutes of sunlight if we sprayed at noon or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we fed that information back to BSF. BSF went back in the laboratories, and then they developed Merge adjuvant, which was really the most spectacular adjuvant at that time, and it's still one of our very best ones, and is used with other chemistry because it's so good. But all we did is we got around that problem by just getting that herbicide. Instead of taking a couple hours to get into the plant, we now got it in within 15 or 20 minutes. So that's another reason why the whole absorption thing could be greater during at nighttime. Now the translocation thing is totally different. Translocation occurs when the plant is growing, and when we have sunlight and we have photosynthesis in the plant, it's producing sugars, and those sugars are moving from the leaves where we have photosynthesis, and they're maybe moving up to the growing point of the plant, or they could be moving down into the root system of the plant. But all the herbicides, they just go along for the ride with those moving sugars. And that's the same for an insecticide or a fungicide. So if we don't have an actively growing plant, we don't have that sugars moving around, then the herbicide is just going to sit where we put it into the leaf. So that's when we sort of talk about, you've heard this actively growing conditions again. We need to get that herbicide to move to the site of action. So if we want to kill a weed, in most cases just getting it into the leaf is not enough. We need to get it to the growing point of the plant to actually have that killing effect. So if a weed is stressed, if it's drought stressed or is under cold conditions or whatever, you think it's half dead already, we can apply a herbicide and we can finish it off. That's the exact opposite. The healthier that weed is, the better kill we're going to get on all of our systemic herbicides. And then in terms of our crop, actually an actively growing crop will degrade that herbicide. So most of our crops are tolerant because they break down the herbicide so fast that it doesn't have a chance to exert its killing effect. But if we were to spray a plant after a frost at night, or very cold conditions, or waterlogged soil that we had this spring, it's not growing nearly as well as it should be, and then we can sometimes get some herbicide injury that we would not get in other conditions. So the absorption and the translocation thing is sort of different, and we'll talk about some types of different modes of action of chemistry a little bit. But I think now I want to turn it over to Don, and he'll talk about his experience, and then we want you to ask lots of questions, and then we have a few plots that we're going to look here at the very end as well.
I think the first time that I got thinking about night spraying, it was a day not greatly unlike we see right here. It was in fact, it might have even been hotter. It was, I think it was 03. And it seemed like every day we were hitting 30 degrees. And I'm from Three Hills, about 280 kilometers virtually straight north of here. And you get reading the labels on some of the chemicals you're spraying, and the temperature, we're above that temperature. Well, why don't I just spray at night instead when it's cooler? I don't see anything about not doing that. Another thing that happened, you didn't steal my thunder today, Bob, for a change. The other event that happened that very same year was auto steering. And to me, you can't really do a night. This is almost echinacea. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted when you start talking about anything to do with auto steering. I bet you there is. Is there anybody out there that doesn't auto steer? Not a single one. Not shot. So you're trying to beat the heat factor, and I've just been dying to say this. Is it just me or all those trees pointing to the northeast? You're avoiding the wind as well. That's northeast, isn't it? I think it is. So you get those this way. Well, the trees are leaning that way, though. So to get out of the wind factor, which we can have just the problem up in Three Hills as you can here with wind, and get out of the heat factor, and that's when I kind of started night spraying. It kind of helps if you're a night hawk, by the way, from a logistical standpoint. If you like being up at night, that even helps more. So I just have a pull type sprayer. Can answer all the questions before I get asked. But it's got a bigger tank than even the Deer. It's just a Brandt suspended boom. So I'm limited to 20 kilometers an hour for spraying it because the tail starts wagging the dog otherwise with a pull type sprayer. That was an interesting conversation Bob referred to back in, I think I remember Bob 6-7 years ago anyway. And I asked him, I says, is there such a thing, because it's generally not addressed on labels, as too much dew to spray chemical on, and that's what really, I think, is the reason I ended up here, that very question so many years ago. And Bob's basic answer, and you could elaborate later, Bob, but was basically, no, there's no such thing as too much dew. And since I don't worry about the tires water flying off them when you're spraying at 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. So I can't think of a single failure from spraying on dew or at night, really.
And so you have one or two examples where you think you've had better control, Don?
Well, and I'll use the Liberty example, because it seems in our area Liberty gets a bad rap or has a bad name. I do, if you read the label, how many read labels out of sheer curiosity? Liars. Anyway, I do absolutely everything wrong relative to that label. I don't use enough water, probably don't spray at the rates they want, spray it at night, everything's wrong. And I really like Liberty. I've never had a failure on Liberty at all. And that's why I don't understand why Liberty often gets quoted for herbicide performance issues. I really like it. It's a good rotational product as well. So there's a whirlwind, speaking of.
Specifically on Liberty, Don, do you ever take into account the conditions that are going to be prevalent the 24
subsequent
hours ahead?
Yeah, the thought is there, as long as it turns sunny the next day,
Sunny and hot, yeah.
or two, it's a consideration, but you know what spraying's like. If the crop and weeds are at the right stage, spray it and hope for the best, really.
Is there a question on the dew issue? Do we want to talk about that a bit more? So how many people are worried about it being too wet with the dew sometimes?
So you're saying that there isn't really an issue with dew?
I'm saying probably 80% of the time or so there's not. So what has to happen for the plant, dew or rainfall, what has to happen is the spray droplets are sprayed on the leaf, and it has to be so wet that those spray droplets will coalesce with one another. They have to merge either with another spray droplet, or they have to merge with a water droplet that's already on the leaf. And they have to be large enough that they actually become large enough that they will fall off the leaf, or they will roll off the leaf. So actually become so large that gravity just sort of sucks them off the leaf. That's the only case where you can have loss in terms of an uptake. So after a light rain, you will have enough big water droplets on there that the spray droplet hits that droplet, some of those droplets will come off. In a dew situation, most of the time that's not going to happen. So it's going to be pretty wet, but it's going to be sort of like an even wetness. The whole surface is wetness. You don't have big droplets there. And in most cases, it's not going to be a concern in terms of it actually rolling off of the leaf. And then the good things is you have that hydrated cuticle, you have a slower droplet drying time, and you can get more absorption into the plant.
There really shouldn't be a herbicide difference though, Bob, right? With that large droplet factor. It shouldn't make any difference which chemical, or would it?
Well, I think we're talking in general terms of absorption into it. So when we talk about weed control, we want to get as much as possible into the weed. Now, everything I've just sort of talked about, I mean, it's the same thing for the crop. So if you have borderline tolerance to a crop from a herbicide that you might be using, then potentially you could get a little bit more injury on that crop if that's the situation, right? So if just under conditions are not favorable for that crop anyway, it's not actively growing. Like I say, we have very, near freezing conditions overnight, or it's under drought stress or waterlogged, and then if we get more of it into the plant, then that actually worsens the situation. So there's a whole crop tolerance thing, to sort of think about as well. Most of our herbicides are not, not a factor, but there's a few where, maybe we'll see a little bit of shortening of the crop or a little bit of yellowing of the crop. And if that's the case, then you should think about those conditions.
Most of my neighbors and friends say it's a good thing I spray on dew, because you got to mix the chemical with water somehow. So.
In terms of the weather before spraying and after spraying, we actually have done research on that. So as long as you sort of have the day afterwards, as long as you have a reasonably sunny day and you're more than 10 degrees Celsius or whatever, that's going to be okay. But the 2 to 3 to 4 days before you spray, can have a significant effect on terms of herbicide performance. So if it's been extremely hot and dry, I mean, that means that you have a thicker cuticle and more wax on the leaves, or if you're under drought stress or whatever. So it's about, in terms of weather conditions, sort of like 90% of the effect will be those 3 to 4 days before spraying, and only 10% will be the day after spraying. So now people talked about what, when's it too cold or whatever. Some people said, well, if it freezes, well, obviously it freezes. If your sprayer is going to freeze up, then don't do that. So, but if you're just if you're talking like 5 degrees overnight or something like that, that's not a problem, because we, as long as we know we're going to have a reasonably sunny, warm day the next day. And I think really anything that's 10 or 12 degrees Celsius, is the plants will start growing and they'll start working. So.
What are your comments on dew and
Glyphosate, I say it would be no different than any of the other ones we've talked about. I mean, what we know with glyphosate is it's one of the few ones that we know that the more concentrated the droplet is, the better penetration into the leaf. So that's why lower water volumes are actually more effective with glyphosate than high water volumes. We don't need coverage with glyphosate because it's systemic, it's highly translocated. So as long as we get, we don't need 50 droplets on a leaf, as long as we get 10, that's good enough. And if it's per droplet more concentrated, it actually works better. To a certain point, but really 5 would always be better than 10, and 3 might be better than 5 even with a glyphosate story. The whole glyphosate story is dust. I mean, that's the thing that you all know already. So because it's so tightly bound to any soil particles, in which dust is really a soil particle, that it just inactivates that glyphosate. So the only thing that's going to inhibit glyphosate activity is your dust and your dirt. I think there's a question over here.
Will the water volume affect how the droplets will coalesce? Like if you're in a heavy dew in the middle of the night, will you see a difference between a 4-gallon application and a 10-gallon application? That's a good question.
Well, I think it might depend a little bit more on droplet size. So I guess if they were very coarse droplets, they would just be larger when they go on themselves, and that means they wouldn't have to grow as much to get big enough to sort of go off the leaf. So if it was extremely coarse, I think that could potentially be a disadvantage. So. But I want to move into one more thing. The main disadvantage or a couple of disadvantages for doing that. We'll sort of get into that a bit. I mean, there's the obvious one. He has GPS capability and auto steer, but people sort of ask, well, what about other obstacles in the field? So what about that slough hole that you don't know is there? You're going to get stuck, or is there a tree falls down, or here we have lots of pivots and things like that. So I mean, you have to sort of take all of that into consideration. The other main one that the spray experts will talk about is this inversion situation that can happen at night. And what that is we have a situation where we have a warm, sunny day, and the soil becomes very warm, and at night, the soil is warmer than the air. So the air is cooling off faster than the soil. The soil is radiating heat. And so air moves from warm to cold. So in that case, the air is sort of from the ground is actually sort of moving upwards, or at least it's resisting sort of movement down. And what can happen is you can spray in that situation, and the spray droplet, you think gravity is going to take it down to the ground, but this inversion factor can be enough to counteract gravity, and those spray droplets can sort of be suspended in the air, and they can sort of sit like a fog, like a little cloud sort of sitting there, and then they don't get down to where they're going, and you can end up in a situation where then they can actually move downwind. And this is, you've maybe heard examples of where you have a drift situation that's a mile from where you sprayed, or 2 miles from where you sprayed. So it can actually drift that far and then will settle in the morning. So those conditions are when you have a pretty hot day and it cools off quite a bit at night, and you have no wind. So I mean, it's dead calm, so there's no mixing of the air to sort of counteract that. And I think if you think about dust at maybe off a gravel road, or dust at combining time in the fall, you maybe seen that dust hanging in the air, it just sits there. That's what we're talking about. And so that can happen with a spray cloud as well, or with our spray pattern. So in those situations, you need to be aware of that, and I guess in terms of maybe time of year. I don't think that would be much of a problem in April or May when we're doing our burn down treatments or some of our herbicide treatments in early June. I don't know, our years, at least recently, it's been pretty cold weather. We don't have those conditions. And if we were spraying in the fall, I don't think we have those conditions as well. But I think, maybe in the middle of June or a day like today could be a very real situation. Or if we're spraying in the middle of the season on some of our fungicides or insecticides, maybe you're not worried about drift killing your neighboring crop, but you might not be getting the coverage and thus losing sort of efficacy. So that's the number one disadvantage I see in terms of potentially spraying and night spraying. And certainly people like Tom Wolfe in Saskatoon, or even you're going to talk to Brian Starvinsky later on this afternoon, that's what people will sort of talk about. So that's very real, and I don't want anybody to discount that or whatever. So when you have that situation, it's a big potential problem. But I suspect there's probably 75% of the cases that's not really going to be a problem here in southern Alberta, especially in our windy environment. So
That inversion no wind thing at harvest time seems to happen a couple or 3 times a year up in our country, and a friend of mine refers to that as harvesting by the braille system when that happens, because you can't see anything sometimes.
Bob, would it be fair to say too that maybe the risk of inversion or effects of inversion would be minimized now with the coarser sprays that we're using?
yeah, I think so. I don't have any research to really document that up, but it came out of our conversations the last couple of days. And so, just with the type of sprayers we have now, and we're trying to spray coarser sprays, we are getting more penetration onto the plant. So we actually are, we have larger droplets. So obviously those very small droplets, that are most prone to drift in a wind situation, are also the droplets that are most prone to sitting in this cloud and moving off-site. So if we go with our coarse, or somewhat medium to medium coarse droplets that we're probably going with anyway to avoid drift, it's probably lessen this effect of this inversion thing. And then the chemistry comes into play as well. Is the other question came up today. Is there a difference between 2,4-D amine and 2,4-D ester? Well, we all know those ester formulations are more volatile and sit in the air, and if we get a drift situation, then they can be greater with that. In a normal drift situation, this inversion factor would be the same thing. So there could be some differences between products as well. So, yes.
Talking about evaporation on leaf, will it do rehydrate
Yeah.
chemical?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So as I talked about this droplet drying time, as soon as it dries down, the herbicide goes into a crystalline form. It's no longer in solution. So it goes into a crystal. That crystal cannot penetrate into the plant. So it sits there. Then if we have a little bit of light rainfall the next day or a little bit of dew, it can redissolve if we have enough. And so it can redissolve temporarily, and then it can get entry again. So you would have to have that happen probably within 12 hours, or certainly no more than 24 hours, because after that time, it would have dried up, it would have been degraded by UV radiation, it would have been blown off by winds, something else would have happened to it. But certainly within a short period of time, that's true. It could dry down and can wet up again. And so that's the other reason, if you were to spray late in the evening, then you maybe have the slower droplet drying time. But if it did dry during the night and then you got to do it 5 or 6 in the morning, that could work. If you did spray during the day, it could dry down at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you get a dew at midnight. It could actually do that. So that's the time frame we're talking about. A matter of hours, not days.
Is there any chemical group that might be more prone to do crop injury overnight versus some other ones, like a group 1 versus a group 2 or a group 4 versus, any particular groups that may cause crop
Yeah.
injury overnight?
So the question was about, sort of different modes of action or different groups of chemistry. Would some be more prone to being a problem or whatever? So I think, as I said before, the crops tolerate the chemistry in most cases because they degrade the herbicide and the weeds do not. So you need some favorable conditions for that to happen. I guess what I'm suggesting is if you spray in the night, in most of the time, the plant is still growing in the night. The physiological mechanisms that is happening of growing are still happening all night long. What you don't have is you don't have photosynthesis. So you don't have translocation, you don't have movement, but in terms of degrading that, the plant is still physiologically working away. In fact, it grows more at night than it does during the day. In fact, people do as well. 2/3 of all of our nutrition ability, our growth of our cells in our bodies is happening when we sleep at night, not when we're awake during the daytime. So to a large extent, that's not the case. I think the bigger problem would be if we sprayed it on a really cold night and then it stayed really cold the next day. In that case, maybe the plant just isn't growing as much as it should be, and it might not break down the herbicide as much. So one case where we actually think it could actually work a little bit better in terms of this translocation story are contact herbicides such as Liberty or our Regulone treatment or a Gramoxone treatment. They have to get into the cell, but they kill it so quickly that there's no movement from one cell to another cell. And that's actually what inhibits the translocation. It's one of the reasons why we don't have any movement. If we do it at night, then this killing action is slowed down. So we can actually get a little bit of translocation with our so-called contact herbicides that will not move at all during the day. They will actually move a little bit during the night. And so we've seen sometimes a little bit better control with a Regulone or with a Liberty treatment if we get a little bit movement in the night, and then it sort of becomes growing more and the sunlight kicks in. Certainly like a Gramoxone treatment and Diquat, they actually require sunlight to activate them. Not so much Liberty, but those ones actually require sunlight to do the job. So they can actually sort of work a little bit better in that situation possibly. So what we're going to look at some plots here, and I guess we're not really advocating night spraying. I think we wanted to have this conversation. I was just curious to know how many people are doing it. And I think obviously because of GPS now, we have a capability we didn't have 10 years ago. And I just wanted people to sort of think about the possibility. So if you've never thought about it, I just wanted people to sort of think about it. Because I think, when we have so many windy days or so many wet days that we've had the last couple of springs here, it's almost impossible to get the herbicide down when we want it to. So this is another opportunity to sort of spray at night, maybe when you wouldn't have considered it in the past. We're going to look at some plots here. What we've found across the board, and most of them, is that it's equal between day and night. And that's not a bad news story. That's actually a very good news story. That means we can spray at night and we don't expect it to be any worse. We have a couple of cases where we actually think it's better when we sprayed at night than during the day. So we'll actually have a look at those. We'll come into the plots and have a look, and then obviously you can ask more questions as we go along as well. I'll explain the plot layout is on page 17 in your booklet. And what we did here is we have a strip of barley running on the left-hand side if you're behind me, and we have a strip of field peas, and then we have a strip of camelina on the far right-hand side. And then on the far left over here, on every one, this is sprayed during the day, this little plot between the two orange colored stakes. And then if I just move over here, this is sprayed at night. And then we just have a check plot that's not sprayed at all. And that repeats itself across. And then we have 4 different strips. Our first, everything in here is Roundup. The next strip, everything is Liberty. The next one is Gramoxone, the third one, and the fourth one back there is Solo. And so what I tried to do in here is I have 2 systemic herbicides being Roundup and Solo. I have 2 contact herbicides being Gramoxone and Liberty. And we just sprayed it across a range of species, and I wanted something that had activity on a lot of different species. And so we'll just sort of wander in and have a look here. So our first day on the Roundup, we thought we saw a little bit of difference where the night spraying maybe was a little bit more effective on peas than during the day, but I don't think I can see that anymore. So that's that particular plot here. What we saw come up here, we'll come up to maybe to the Liberty one. So this is actually a camelina plot that I'm looking at here, but we have this big volunteer barley in here. And so this one was sprayed in the daytime. So we sprayed 11 o'clock in the morning, around noon, and then we sprayed around 11 o'clock at night or around midnight. And Dawn and I think we see a little bit more something on the barley sprayed at night than we do over here.
And that maybe backs up the point about it being longer on sitting on the leaves on the cuticles, perhaps.
And so maybe that's a little bit counterintuitive, because we know there's two things we know about Liberty. One is the higher humidity, the better Liberty will work. And the other thing we know is on Liberty will work better in warm weather than in cold temperatures. So the first thing you say, okay, so the humidity thing, we have more humidity at night than we during the day. So that makes sense. The temperature thing is, well, it's a lot cooler at night than it is during the day. So you think, well, okay, how can that be? But what I'm telling you is don't think so much about what it is in terms of this translocation or this activity thing during the night. As long as you have a warm day the next day, then that's not a problem. So at night, we're thinking more about absorption into the plant, and the daytime, we're thinking more about translocation in the plant, and then we're thinking about activation of the herbicide during the daytime. So I don't see any disadvantage to a cool night as long as we know we're going to have a reasonable day tomorrow. So, and my own cutoff is 10 degrees Celsius. If we think it's going to be 10 or 12 degrees Celsius the next day, and if there's a bit of sun, that's better. But for lots of herbicides, the sun doesn't matter so much as more of a temperature thing. So if it's if you're spraying your burn down treatment in April and it's 2 degrees at night and the forecast is for 8 the next morning, then I wouldn't do it. But if you think you're going to get up to a reasonable temperature, then I don't see the disadvantage.
To me, the summary on these plots is it's always at least equal and never worse. In this case, it might even be better. So what that means is you can spray with a fair amount of confidence that likely I'm going to do just as good a job in the nighttime as I would in the day. And if the other factors are forcing you into doing it, don't be so concerned about it. Just do it.
But we haven't covered all. I'll just add one thing here. We haven't covered off all the chemistries, and I have not done any research on this. In fact, there's virtually no research out there anywhere on sort of looking at this question. So this is a bit of an opening conversation, and we wanted to just sort of have have a conversation, get the feedback from you, bounce around ideas amongst ourselves. I mean, maybe it's something that Ken Coles and his group would sort of take on as sort of an expanded research project in future years or something like that, because there's different chemistries we could look at. There's lots of things that we could look at. So we don't know that's a blanket yes. In fact, in biology, I always say there is never 100% yes. So if something works, 7 or 8 times out of 10, well, you can take that to the bank, and that's as good as you're ever going to get. So you'll never get anything that works 100% of the time. So if you see something that it doesn't work, then don't discount that. It could be real, so make note of it. And actually, I'd appreciate a phone call and let me know at a time where it failed for you or didn't work. So
at least in these plots, it appears.
So at least in these plots, it limited at what we did. So
isn't the sign of a good researcher is when the conclusion is you need more research?
Absolutely, that's how I generate my money. So I sort of interrupted you here on your question.
Well, it's 2 questions really. With Liberty, does your work show any difference? Or have you seen work that shows a difference between high and low water volumes? And 2, what do you think is the main reason that Liberty does fail all the time?
Well, Liberty is largely a contact type of herbicide. So though anything that's contact is the coverage becomes more important because we don't have any movement within the plant. So if I only get 1 or 2 droplets on it, or I miss a leaf completely, it will not kill that leaf. So any systemic herbicide, we have potential to lower water volumes, or we can not worry about coverage as much because as long as we get a few droplets, it'll move into it. Or we can miss a leaf completely and it'll move from a treated leaf into an untreated leaf. So with Liberty, I think we want to keep our water volume up reasonable. I would not shave rates the way that I would shave rates with Roundup. So that's the first thing I would say. We know when it works is, as I already said, where it tends to have climates where it's higher humidity or warmer conditions. It does not seem to work in very cold conditions, for instance. So for an example, Liberty Link canola in Australia is probably never ever going to make it because they're applying Liberty in July and August, which is the middle of their winter, and it just does not work for them. So in that situation, but they're talking about a high of 8 degrees or a high of 6 degrees or something like that. So those are sort of when it works. In terms of in terms of species, I mean, Liberty's much better on broadleaf species than it is grass species across the board, right? So grass is really all Liberty. Liberty's pretty weak on lots of grasses. And the other thing about grasses is that because they're an upright leaf structure, they're harder to get good coverage on a grass. So a wild oat or volunteer barley or volunteer wheat. And if it's not systemic and we don't have good coverage, then we don't have the uptake as well. And then just inherently, they're just not as good on grasses as say a Roundup is. So,
What are you spraying for water, Don?
yeah, so I'll let answer him because he makes Liberty work fantastic, and he's doing a lot of things that I just told you shouldn't do. So because he is going lower water volumes and doing a few things. So we'll let him answer that question.
It's not that I don't know, it's I got to convert it for you. I don't like going much under 50 liters per hectare, which is what?
That's about 4 gallons per
something
acre.
like that. On Roundup stuff, the best I can spray is about 30, so I'm down on 2.7 or whatever that is per acre. But Liberty, I don't like going much under 50. I kind of mix it up and sort of kind of fit the field and go spray the field for 2 or 3.
There was one comment that I wanted to make, because I heard you said you're spraying night for your fungicides. Is that right?
Not a lot. Some.
Okay. Last year we were working on a sclerotinia white mold project on dry beans, and I was completely awestruck the pattern of control difference in a field. And what had happened is the grower had sprayed the outside runs right before it was dark, and then he started back up in the morning, and just that little bit of a difference probably made a control difference of probably 60 to 70%. Like, it was just amazing. So I think there is probably a little bit of work. From what I've seen,
sprayed stuff being better. You mean?
that part I can't remember. I just remember there was a huge difference, and how could intuitively you think, wow, why would that make such a difference? And but it did. So I think when it comes to fungicide timing, there's certainly some work to do.
And that was the older contact fungicide. I'm wondering now with the higher end ones that are translocating, maybe again it's not, because I think it was a contact thing back then. You're getting so much, because your point, Bob, about having the leaf just kind of totally covered with that very, very light layer of humidity, really seemed like it was going to really enhance the coverage. So that was what we thought. And so we were pretty happy, but maybe the newer chemistries don't require that so much. I don't know.
Did you want to show anything back?
Well, we'll look at one more plot here because I think there's one still is showing up here pretty well. So this one over here is field peas, and so this is gramoxone. So this plot right over here being sprayed during the day, and this one being sprayed at night. And I think it's still showing up that we have better activity, or we are, at the very least, we have faster activity. These plots were sprayed 9 days ago, so I probably should have mentioned that. So, and we've had, pretty warm conditions, I guess, over that time. But so, we definitely have a little more something happening here with the gramoxone. So that can be more uptake into the plant, or that could be this sort of delayed translocation, or this delayed killing effect I talked about with gramoxone. So that you actually get a little bit more movement within the plant during the nighttime, and then as soon as we get sunlight, with gramoxone, so gramoxone and Regulone, they absolutely have to have sunlight to work. So that, you have that delayed and you have a better effect here. All these things, I guess, too, when we talk about absorption, if we have a hard to wet plant or a plant that resists absorption, I mean, maybe that's when the biggest advantage would be. So if we think of a Russian thistle, extremely thin leaves and a heavy, heavy wax layer on Russian thistle. It's a drought tolerant, it's a desert species. So it does everything it can to stop water from losing from the plant. So if no water can get out, it means no water can get in. Another one would be wild buckwheat, is a pretty thick cuticle and heavy wax deposits on a wild buckwheat as well. So some of those species, the night thing could be more of an advantage as compared to a wild oat or volunteer cereal, for instance. And field pea would be a bit of an example like that. Certainly field pea has a more wax on the field pea compared to compared to the barley over there, for instance, or whatever. So when we talk about some of these things, we talk in generalities, but then there are actually specifics that could come into play depending on the type of, the crop that you have or the weed species you may be looking at or whatever. So.
What about leaf absorption, like to the cuticle with droplet size? Like how important, I know probably Brian's gonna get into this, but because now when we're hearing a little bit more about Don, because you kind of hooked us in with that never had a failure with Liberty concept, is a good deal. If you're going with that small, like you're going low volumes of water carrier, so obviously it's a smaller nozzle, not necessarily really small. And with if you're going to the air induction nozzles, then of course bigger droplets. But I mean the old XR nozzles worked really great if you had perfect conditions, right? Because you had great coverage. So is it as much a coverage thing, Don, that you're seeing as it is with now you're not getting the crystals forming because it's going to have good humidity? Like is it a combination of all the things?
I believe you're right. I believe it's not just one thing usually. It's a combination of those two events. And you're right about the droplet size because I've already seen that over there, and it's really interesting. But yeah, I think it's two.
So what nozzle are you using again?
Oh, very target with the yellow cap, which he has over there.
Okay, so we'll have a look at that. That's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Are surfactants starting to play a bigger role? Days past, when glyphosate was very expensive, people were trying to cheapen things up and were using dish soap, various things like that.
Mr. Clean,
Amway.
30 years ago.
Yeah, LOC, things of that nature. Are the chemical companies now starting to include it into their sprays, or is it still something that hasn't been really researched?
Well, I think adjuvants and surfactants are very important. So adjuvants is a catch-all term, and that's used anything that sort of makes the herbicide work better. So anything that dissolves the herbicide in cold water, anything that will break down waxy layer on a cuticle, that's all an adjuvant class. A surfactant is something that modifies the surface properties of that spray droplet, and what it does is it lowers the surface tension of that water droplet. So instead of sitting as a perfectly spherical glob, it lowers the surface tension, and so it sits on the leaf more in that type of shape. So you have more contact between the leaf and the droplet. So that's a very technical sort of answer, but they are very important. Lots of herbicides do not work if we don't spray an adjuvant. I mean, I go back to the post example. If we didn't have a good adjuvant such as merge, I mean, it wouldn't kill hardly anything. So, but most of the companies are building that into the system. If we talk specifically about Roundup, I mean, Monsanto knows that chemistry backwards and forwards because of the 35 or 40 years experience that they have. So what they have now in their current Roundup that Monsanto sells, there's nothing you can add that will make it better. In fact, you could make it worse, definitely. But I'll back up and say, that doesn't necessarily mean if you're buying a generic out of China or somewhere else that you couldn't add some ammonium sulfate or add something that might improve that. Because some of those, the patent's off on glyphosate, that doesn't necessarily mean the patent's off on the surfactant that Monsanto is including in their adjuvant. Or BSF, the patent is now off on merge, and you'll find many more companies using merge with their products because the patent has expired. But so the answer is it's very, very important, and probably the majority of the cases, the best recommendations are already out there. They're already included in the formulation, or the company has tested 50 different adjuvants and they put 2 or 3 on the label that they know that work. So it's very rare that you're going to pull something off the shelf yourself and make something work better.
I would really like to encourage more research into this because I think there's a lot of interest, and obviously, like we just talked about at lunch, Don, right? Like it's one of the most stressful operations on our farm right now is spraying, because we're dealing with so many different weather effects, and if we can get rid of some of them, and maybe it's the kind of research that says, well, during the daytime, you're going out with your air bubble jet or your air induction nozzle, but then as soon as you get into really, really nice conditions at night, you flip over and you go to a different nozzle that is going to give you even better coverage, and you're going to just ramp up your control, and maybe you can cut your rates. But at least you're able to do maybe 1,200 acres that day instead of 500.
This has been a fun plot to watch over the 3 days.
Yeah, it's developed, hasn't it?
And
So
I have even a new thing that I just discovered while you guys were talking, and I'm looking through the solo plots behind us, is that I'm pretty sure I'm seeing an improved kill on the thistle on the nighttime spraying. So you guys can come take a look and be the judges yourself. But And then I also see some kochia that wasn't killed with the solo. I don't know what happened there.
We don't need to do research into that one, Ken. You have enough money already. We know it's resistant. You don't need money. But you can see Ken's making a good pitch for research dollars here. But I think we would appreciate some feedback in terms of whether you think this is something that requires some more work. And I mean, does anybody here know of do you know that people are doing this in other countries, for instance? Anybody know?
Australia, are they not?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know.
See, I think they're looking for some humidity because during some of their seasons, if it's depending on what season that they're in, but if it's a summer crop or a winter crop, then they're looking for some humidity. That's what I've understood from talking to a few Australians, that they actually want to go at night because they can't go when it's so dry. Because you get that same crystal on the leaf scenario, right?
That, and we know you don't work hard enough in the daytime.
Lots of our conditions when we spray, I mean, we're a cool season, we're a cool country, right? So, lots of our conditions are not too hot, but we maybe don't talk about that too much. But I mean, on a day like today, I guarantee you would not want to spray between 11 in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You absolutely would be the worst thing you could do. So that's categorically, I know that. So, because it's just too damn hot out here. So that we're not going to get absorption into the plant. And we're going to get surfactant burn on the crop in these situations. And this is definitely not the time of day to be spraying when it's 30 degrees from that 11 till 4 in the afternoon. So shut her down at 11, which is only 10 by the sun time, and don't fire that guy up until 7 in the evening would be my advice if you're hitting 30 degrees Celsius. So.
What about for insecticide or fungicide?
Well, I think it's the same thing in terms of a lot of it is sort of the absorption. Most of our fungicides and insecticides are systemic products now. They still have to get into the leaf. They still have to get in there and then they'll move without there. So anything that's decreasing the absorption of all those things, then it's a negative.
Some of the insecticides are broken down by especially grasshopper, because it's warm too.
Yeah. And that would be chemistry by chemistry, and I'm not as familiar with that chemistry, but that's a very real situation. Again, is the UV light breaking down stuff. So, do we want to have a look at the solo plot before we leave,
What about
Ken?
crop safety at night?
What's that?
What about crop safety at night? Have you done any?
Well, we've talked a little bit about that. So, when I think it's going to be a problem is if you have conditions the next day that are not conducive to breaking down the herbicide. And I've sort of covered that, I've sort of talked about that a bit. You want an actively growing crop the next day to degrade that herbicide. So, some of the physiology that's happening to break down the herbicide is happening at night. As I said, it doesn't have to be, the plant is still physiologically doing stuff at night. So some of that's still happening, but it might be a little bit more if we have some sunlight conditions the next day and stuff like that as well. And we are, and I already sort of said this as well, I mean, if your tolerance is sort of borderline, we're talking about getting more herbicide into the crop, and so we could make it worse. So again, if you're under drought stress or you have waterlogged crop, and we had a lot of yellow crop here this year, and that was not nitrogen deficiency, that was just wet feet underwater. Like I pumped all of my plots, I pumped water off all my plots this year. So when it's yellow like that, and we stunted barley in one of my plots this year, and that was just achieve and whatever else we use for a broadleaf herbicide, and it's recovered, but that was just because it wasn't, it was suffering, really suffering bad. So that's the condition when we get a little bit more in the night, we aggravate that potential problem. So okay, we want to look at the solo plot, and then we need to move on, I think. So
Yes.
So this is the solo plot here, seeded to camelina. The first day we came out here, we saw a little bit, maybe a faster kill on camelina at night, but now Ken is mentioning maybe you can see something on Canada thistle, so you can look for yourself. Is there a little more yellowing on that Canada thistle at that night treatment versus the day treatment? So, and we have some more volunteer barley in this guy here as well. So. Any last questions for Don? So Don's been doing this for 6 or 7 years.
Not Camelina.
But he's talked about, I guess the other thing is people had, in our other sessions, they asked about different types of sprayers and, high clearance sprayers. And, somebody had a question about spraying by airplane and all those things. Well, the answer, the honest answer is we don't know all those things. And when Don says he's never had a failure, think about, his spray operation. So what equipment, what nozzles is he using, what sprayer is he using, and what products is he applying? And but you're doing it as a burn down treatment, Don,
Yes.
and he's doing it as in-crop treatments in July. So he's doing that in April and May, and he's doing it in June. So he's covered off a fair bit of timeline in terms of what the temperatures may be or what the conditions may be, and it's worked. It's worked for him. So
This dovetails really well with the next presentation on nozzles too. That these fit together really well. So.
Well, join me in thanking Bob and Don.
thanks, everybody.
I'd like to thank Ken and his group. It's quite an honor to be asked, and especially to work with Bob. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next session.
My name is Brian Starzinski. I'm a project manager with the Agricultural Technology Center. We have our office and shop just immediately south of the Lethbridge Community College, and we're part of Alberta Agriculture. Formerly, before it became the Ag Tech Center, it used to be called the Prairie Agriculture Machinery Institute, PAMI, and we used to test every make and model of machine out there and write reports on it. Now we concentrate more on the research and development of equipment. And I've been involved with spraying and nozzles for ever since I can remember. And I've been even a custom applicator for a while there, but I didn't like those 20-hour days. But when you work for Alberta Agriculture and you're doing plots, instead of working 20-hour days, they're still 16-hour days. So it's... Anyways, Tom Wolf is supposed to be here. He's busy doing his projects, trying to finish off his projects, so I'm here alone. And what the committee and Tom wanted me to talk about was the pressures of spraying. So we'll talk a little bit about speed, pressure, and spray quality using that board over there. Then we'll do some demonstrations with the newer nozzles. Okay, I want you guys to have a look at the Guardian nozzles that are kind of new. And we're going to compare them to the Very Target nozzles, and we'll maybe talk just a bit about the AIM command system. And then we'll do a live demonstration with Ken's truck mount sprayer there. He's been bugging me to include it in this demonstration because he wants to show off his GPS system and his self-steer system. So when he's driving past here, just have a good look at him. He's always doing something in that cab. I think he was supposed to sit on top of the cab today, but I'm not sure if he's got that resolved. Okay, so we'll start over here. If you guys want to come closer, you can. That's really up to you. When we're doing projects on the nozzles, and like we're doing a study right now on solid seeded beans, and we're using different water rates and different types of different types of nozzles. Before we actually take that out to the field, we make sure we know what that nozzle is doing. So we have our own nozzle database, and that's what these charts are all about. And up here on the first row, I'm just showing a Greenleaf's turbo drop system. We're going to be using that as an example. And what I'm showing how it operates over a wide range of speeds. I think I'm going here at 5.5 miles an hour and up to here about 12 miles an hour. And you can see what we're trying to find out is what your droplet deposition is, both on a horizontal leaf and a vertical leaf. We look at spray patterns, okay, and we use the term coefficient of variation. And a good coefficient of variation on a spray pattern is 15% and lower. Alberta Agriculture has a little looser standard. It's at 25%, but we like to get them tighter than that. We look at nozzles spray drift characteristics, okay. This stuff here you don't see in the nozzle manufacturers' brochures or catalogs or whatever, okay. All they show is something like this, where you see a lot of color, okay? And before we get started, I like to distinguish those two colors, okay? One set of color that you'll see on their charts describes the size. All right. And I don't have the orange here, but the orange is a 0-1 tip, okay? And what that means is it delivers 0.1 US gallons per minute at 40 psi, and delivers 5 gallons per acre if you're traveling 5 miles an hour. So one set of colors, like I said, describes the size, and you should know just by looking at a nozzle what its application rate is going to be just by the color, okay? And along with that, they still got their numbers. So is everybody clear on color and size? The 01, 02, 04s? Everybody clear on that? Okay, we'll just leave that alone. The other color you'll see out there, and some is they describe the spray quality, okay? And there's 6 classifications. Very fine, fine, medium, coarse, very coarse, and extremely coarse. There's 6 categories, okay? And that's how they tell you what type of spray you're going to get, what kind of coverage you're going to get at the different pressures, okay? And we'll get into a little bit more of that. Also, some nozzles that we're going to be talking about once we get to this facility is they don't, this is the variable rate nozzle. It's actually, these colors don't represent the size, but represent the spray quality, okay? And that's something that you got to distinguish. So orange here isn't a 0-1 tip. It's orange. If you match it with that, it's saying it produces a fine spray. Yellow, again, it's a medium spray, as the chart says. Blue is a coarse spray, and the green is a very coarse, and the white is extremely coarse, okay? As we get further and further on, you'll find that once we get to the fine and the extremely coarse spray qualities, we don't need to be using those extremes. Okay, what I've done in order to understand these charts better, because you guys got to get right up to find out what's going on, I wrote it on a table here, okay? And what I want to show you is when you're changing your speeds, and here we're trying to keep the application rate constant at, with these nozzles at 5 gallons per acre. With the variable rate nozzles, we're trying to keep it constant at 10 gallons per acre. All right? And you'll see that as you're changing speeds, for whatever reason, slowing down or speeding up to get it done faster, but slowing down mainly is because, especially this year, with all the rain we've had and all the bodies of water we have in the fields, we're slowing down, we're getting bogged down, so we're always in that 5 to 7 miles an hour, okay? So you'll see here when you're slowing down, instead of operating at 1640 psi like you should be, you get down to 22 psi. And if you say you speed up to 12 miles an hour with these nozzles, you're up to 100 psi. So when you double your speed from 6 to 12 miles per hour, your pressure has basically gone up from 22 to 180 psi, okay? And I'll get to the significance of that. What happens is, anytime the pressure changes, and if it follows this chart, you'll see that at the very low speeds, you're spraying with extremely coarse and very coarse droplets, okay? And as you increase your speed and the pressure increases, you get to a finer spray, like coarse, when you're in the 60 psi range, and you got to be going about 12 miles an hour to get to the medium spray. So as you're changing your speed, the pressure changes, so does your spray quality. Okay, and you've got to be aware of that when you're selecting your nozzles, and that's what me and Tom are trying to preach. You've got to know where on the curve you are with spray quality. And if I'm going to draw a line here to represent it more on a graph. So we got pressure here, we've got speed over here, and that curve actually, this is the pressure curve, and that pressure curve for a fixed orifice nozzle looks something like this. Whoops, my pen is drying up in this heat. It is really sharp, okay? So just a 1 mile, 2 mile an hour change is, you can drop 20 psi just like that, okay? And along with that, when you're changing your speed, if I was to put the spray quality on that, basically what's happening here, you're spraying with an extremely coarse spray. Here you're a very coarse here. I better get another pen here. Get another marker. So you get into a coarse spray here. And we've got medium, and we get to pressures above 100 psi, you'll start getting into maybe a fine spray, okay? So what's, yeah, this is coarse, medium, and okay, so what impact does that have? Well, if you look at some of the work that Tom Wolfe has done in Saskatoon and using a product like Assure, which is a group 1 chemical, here with this chart, if you can come closer, what he's showing is 3 different water rates, 4, 8, and 12 gallons per acre. And within each section, within each water rate, he's got 3 sizes of nozzles he's using. He's got a medium spray, a coarse spray, and a very coarse spray. And at the low water volumes with a group 1 chemical like Assure, you'll see as the coarser the spray, the less control you got. This is on wild oats, okay? And the same thing with 8 gallons per acre with a group 1 chemical. You got a drop in control with a coarser spray, okay? In order to rectify that, what you got to do is get it to the higher gallons and increase your coverage, and you get a little bit better control. But with a chemical like this, when you're looking at it with a medium spray, if you're not getting, 80, 90, 100% control, really you've got a chemical that's just borderline, just adequate enough to control weeds, okay? You should be up to that 90, 100% with some of the better chemicals, okay? So you're going to suffer more with the weaker chemicals when it comes to quality, spray quality. He's got other charts that illustrate that. Here's Horizon, it's a group 1 chemical. Again, with a low water volume, you can see with a very coarse spray, the control has dropped, okay? This surprises me with Horizon because I've used it in my own studies in the field. I think these may be data from like a greenhouse setup, a more controlled test. And we used the turbo drop nozzles, which should deliver a very coarse spray, and we've got reductions in control, but it wasn't as bad as this at 5 gallons per acre. So I was surprised at that one. Puma Super, it's more of a systemic and contact type of herbicide. It dropped with the very coarse sprays. So that's why we got to know where we are in that curve when you're spraying, especially with the group 1 chemicals. Here's Everest, wild oat control chemical, but it's a group 2, and it doesn't suffer as much with the low water rates or the very coarse sprays, okay? So basically, you can get away with very coarse and coarse sprays if you get into the other groups of chemicals, okay? So you don't have as much problems. So, and that's like probably about 80% of our chemicals out there. A little bit about the very target nozzles. I want to compare these fixed orifice nozzles to the variable rate nozzles, like the very target nozzles. Again, we had this project going on a solid seeded beans, and we were operating anywhere from, I got this in the red, and we were operating anywhere from 4.5 to 9 miles an hour with our sprayer. And you can see that the pressures varied, but they didn't vary very much, 29 to 38 psi. Only a 9 psi difference in that when our speed doubled from 4.5 to 9, okay? And what it looks like on a curve, it's something like this. So it's a lot flatter, okay? And if you look at the spray quality of that type of nozzle, what you'll see, it's all coarse in that range because it's such a narrow increase in pressure, okay? So from here to here, with speed, you're basically working with a coarse spray, so you always know where you are. Is that clear? I'm going to erase. Well, the other thing that we should look at is there's other things that change with speed, and that's drift. You can see here with the fixed orifice nozzle, we're drifting only 5% or the potential drift is about 5% and 5.5 miles an hour at 20 psi. As we increase the speed to 10, 12 miles an hour, we're up to 22%, and that's very significant, okay? So that's another thing you gotta watch out for that you don't see in these charts, okay? The other thing is spray patterns. They vary also with speed. What else? Your number of droplets per square meter vary. The higher the pressure, the more coverage you got. And we're gonna see that in that live demonstration we've got going with that truck mount sprayer, okay? So we'll just leave that for now. I'm trying to hurry through this because I feel you guys are baking out there.
If you took those droplets per square centimeter
Yeah.
and you went to fine and then very fine, would you see droplets per square centimeter? That's landed droplets, right?
Yes.
Would you see that number then go back like a U or bell curve kind of thing? You'd see less droplets land because you get too many fines?
You're probably right in the windier conditions. As a matter of fact, we might even see that today with this little breeze. Okay, yeah, you get a lot less fines getting to the target. And you're partly correct.
We got a problem in our area. New farms running around telling us with clean start, they want very fine spray. They want lots of water, and I'm sitting there going, well,
Boy, we're
what you're getting.
yeah, we're going back to. We're going back to what we were doing in the 70s and 80s, okay? Fine droplets and a lot of water. And I'm not so sure about that. Now, I've never used, what's that product? Clean Start? Yeah, and it's a glyphosate?
Glyphosate and carfentanil.
Okay. From all the studies we've done, I mean, boy, we're having a lot of success staying in the coarse to the medium range. And hopefully, if you don't get nothing else out of this, you know, if you're in that coarse to medium range, you should have success 99% of the time. Okay, it's the fine to very fine and extremely coarse and very coarse that we're concerned about. The other system out there, I've had a lot of phone calls, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. Whoops. Is the aim command system. Now, I don't know much about the aim command system as it is on a Case IH sprayer, but I've tested that system when it was the capstan sharpshooting system back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Okay. What do you think the pressure curve looks like with an aim command system? It's basically, well, you can choose a pressure. Usually, a lot of guys stick with 60 psi. It's basically a straight line, right? All right. And you can choose whatever pressure you want, 25, 60. But it's not as simple as that. And also, it's, you know, you can, also the other thing that stays steady is the application rate, as most controllers do. So if you look at the application rate at 5 gallons per acre, it's also straight, right? The other thing I wanted to know, I forgot to mention with the other nozzles, they do the same thing. I mean, the application rate is always constant. Where the other nozzles have problems is at the lower speeds, okay? Usually you can set limits where you don't want to go below 25 psi or a certain application rate or a certain flow rate. Okay, what happens there is it just screams upwards if you don't let that thing do its work. I usually don't set those limits. I'll set the limits, but just have a warning system, okay? Because usually when you're slowing down, you're in the softer areas, you're in rough areas, or you're near bodies of water, right? And so you got all this chemical going down near bodies of water, right? But with the aim command system, it has a better, it controls it better at the lower speeds, just because it's got pressure modulation, okay? But if it's this simple, is it this simple? Who uses one? Who uses aim command system? Is it that simple?
That's what the salesman told us.
Okay. See, it's not that simple. There's a lot happening behind the scenes. A lot of work with that aim command system was done with Wilger's Combo Jet series, and that's the kind of nozzles they recommend. What kind of nozzles do you have on yours?
You know, we just put on some new ones, the ones that spray forwards and
Yeah, okay, the turbo T-jet twins.
yeah.
Yeah. And Gary Moffat must have been around you.
He was driving his motorhome past. So.
Okay, and that's what they're going to. But prior to that, it was the combo jet series. Eh? I wish it was that simple, but it really isn't all that simple. There's a lot happening there. Okay, I mean it's pulsating all the time. First of all, what size of nozzle do you choose? Do you choose a 04, 08?
I'm not sure.
Okay, but anyways, what they talk about, you know. Let's see if I can get this right. What they talk about, that pressure or that pressure curve is actually something like this. So you can be anywhere here, I guess. All right? And they call that a pressure envelope. All right? Pardon me?
Because of the pulse?
Yeah. Now, they make it sound simple that over here and here and here you can get what? A certain size and specific, right? Here and here. So it's got a lot going to it for it, but there's a lot happening. Okay. So whether it's as constant as this, I don't know. All right. Because the last system I tested was in '99, 2000, and back then, like I said, it was a sharp shooting system. It didn't have pressure modulation. Okay. So if somebody knows any more about it, then... So it's a complicated system. I wish I had one of the reps here to add to this.
How come they never want to run over these tests?
The other thing with this AIM command system, all the guys that worked on it or researched it and helped with the design, they can't be called a third party independent study anymore. Okay, I know Tom's did a lot of work with this system. Okay, so he leaves it at that. So there's not really a third party independent study done with this system. We've had a hard time getting that system every time we ask for it because we have a lot of students and a lot of producers coming through our facility and looking at our tests, what type of tests we do with nozzles. We've always asked for that system, and they've never wanted to upgrade it. And the last time I've asked was this last spring, and they told me it's going to be $20,000. So they don't want us to be involved, I guess. And maybe that's understandable. It's an expensive system, and it's been researched for the last 12 years. Okay. As a matter of fact, it's getting even better and better as they're getting into actual individual nozzle modulation, okay? So one nozzle will operate at a different rate than the adjacent one. So it's getting more and more sophisticated. Okay, that's all I had to say about that one, okay?
Talking about different systems, do you have any experience with like air assist, like spray air?
Oh yeah, but that's a different story. That's a different. I don't have time for that right now. But yeah, we're going back to the 80s and. Is there anything specific you want to know about it?
No, it's just curious how it pencils out on paper, like so you put it in front of those litmus strips when you start playing with the pressures.
Oh yeah, well we instead of talking about, like I said, coarse sprays, coarse and medium, we'd be in that very fine range all the time. Okay. You can get coarser than that, but it works on the a spray quality that's a lot finer, okay? My experience with it, it always stressed me out because when I wanted to get my plots done and there's a little breeze like this and I was working with plots side by side, I was always concerned about the drift. So I've always worried about the drift, even though they say they could dial a droplet size and go, eh? I'm not so sure if it's that simple because another thing maybe we should get at, because we're going to start that table right away. You know, like if you look at a nozzle and its spray quality, it's just not one number, okay? Usually it's a bell curve, okay? where this is the VMD, the volume medium diameter. We should all know that by now, okay? And so the spray is actually widespread, okay? So it's not like when you get a coarse spray, and this you say this is the spray quality is coarse. I mean, we still got a lot of fines. We still got a lot of coarse sprays, okay? And with the spray air system, that bell curve would be shifted over this way here if you're looking at the size here and the frequency over here, okay? Which brings me to the newer nozzles that we're going to be talking about, and that's the Guardian series made by Hypro. They're part of Wecore Industries out of Europe, okay? And we're going to have a look at them. And you're going to see some things that are a little bit different, all right? And why are they different? Is because what they've done with this bell curve, they've made it a little tighter, okay? So you don't have a lot of the fines anymore, okay? And you don't have a lot of the very coarse spray, all right? So it's a lot narrower droplet spectrum. And that's what we'll see in this demonstration here. That camera is really bothering me, you guys. Okay, so if you guys can just gather around this spray table here, or water table. You can see these.
Day 3, so you can be all practiced up for it.
Oh no, when something like that is just sticking in front.
Don't worry, you can edit it. You're very coordinated, Brian. You look good in your black and white. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
As long as they show it in black and white. Okay, I want to demonstrate some of the newer nozzles out there, the Guardian series, and how they compare to the Very Target nozzles. I'm going to pass this around. All the yellow tips here are the Guardian series. Have a look at them. They've got indicators for which way you should actually install them on a sprayer, okay? And what else is there? We're going to look at the Greenleaf's dual fan nozzle, okay? I think it's a dual fan, yeah. And also the Very Target, we're going to spend a little bit more time with this. So this is what I'm going to be showing here on the spray pattern. All right, we're going to start by maybe starting the pump, I guess. I just got a little RV pump in there, so I can't get too high of a pressures or too much flow. But what I'm going to start with is the Guardian, what they call low drift extended range nozzle, okay? And it's similar to a turbo T-jet nozzle. We should be familiar with a turbo T-jet nozzle. It got the same forward or rearward angle, and we'll get into angles a little later. And we're going to just show what the spray pattern looks like in this little breeze. Because we got a little breeze, I'm not so sure if we're going to see the same thing as we did the last couple of days. Look at that thing. And this is a patternator, okay? We've all seen this. And we got it about, well, 45 PSI. It's good enough. Again, that live demonstration that we're going to do, we'll get into the forward and rearward angles then, okay? And you can see that we got actually a very even coverage, okay? All right. And that's the advantage to that system there. The spray pattern? The volume of water that's actually being sprayed across this, the whole width of the sprayer boom. The top. Okay? And it's very level. Comparing it to, did you see those charts back there? Did you see all the peaks and valleys there? That's kind of normal for those type of nozzles that we were looking at. What I'm getting at is look how much more even this coverage is than those nozzles on that chart, okay?
And which one is this, Brian?
This is Hypro's Guardian extended range nozzle. A short form is, just remember, low drift extended range. LDX. You'll see LDX all over their charts, okay? Now, the other tip they've got going, but I think before I show you that, you say, oh, maybe it's all even. I don't know. Well, we're just gonna go to an older nozzle, an older 80-degree tip. This is the old 80-degree tip that were quite common in the 70s and 80s, but aren't very much used anymore because of the automatic rate controllers, okay? And I'll show you why.
No, you're getting very good drift.
It's actually very good. I like these nozzles already.
Doesn't take much for the spray to drift, does it? Okay. And we'll get into that. I should. So you start seeing peaks and valleys, like we did at that bottom set there. Okay, and that bottom set. Even though it's a very target nozzle, it's still a flat fan tip. Okay. Now, why don't we use them anymore? Is because when we have automatic rate controllers and we start slowing down, we get into those pressures that I was talking about, those low pressures. And you can see that the fan angle has already gone down to about 65 degrees. But the other thing that's gone down is the drift, right? So you guys aren't cooling off anymore.
That's right.
Get something that drifts? Well, we're just going to get coarser and coarser from here, so you guys aren't going to get any advantage. So this is 20 psi, and you can see there's a large peaks and valleys. If I would have had this a little longer, it would have been a lot more exaggerated, okay? So we're going to go back to the Guardian series, and we're going to look at the low drift air-induced tip. Again, I've got these pointed forwards, and we get it back up to 40 psi. And we're getting it's actually at 40 psi, I think it's still a little bit coarse, in that coarse range, okay? But they have about a 10-15 degree spraying angle, okay? And what we're going to see in that live demonstration, I'm going to actually have them pointing forwards and rearwards, okay? I think that's when these things work best. But we'll look at their spray pattern. I'll go a little longer so you guys can see the height out much better. It's pretty well a straight line, eh? If, like I mentioned, the coefficient of variation, we're trying to meet, what, 15%? This is well below 4 or 5%, okay? This is really level, okay? And the other advantage it's got, it's an air-induced nozzle, it's a Venturi nozzle, so you got less drift, okay? And I've got those numbers if you actually require them.
Is Guardian a brand name or is it a series?
It's a series.
Who makes it?
Well, Hypro makes them, but I believe Hypro is part of Weecor. It's a European nozzle. It's a European design. Usually, when it comes to nozzles, a lot of that design originates from Europe because usually, like back in the 80s and 90s, I thought Europe was about 5 years ahead of us when it came to nozzle technology or application. Yeah, oh yeah, that's what I should show is, good, thank you for mentioning that because that's what was part of my demonstration was, it almost looks like the ABJ, but the, okay. The air bubble jet has been really successful only because it's actually a very good nozzle. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it drifts a little bit more than most of the air-induced nozzles. Okay, and I've got those numbers. I just can't remember them out of my head. I believe there's about a 30 to 40% reduction in drift when you use an air bubble jet over a turbo T-jet nozzle.
Put an ABJ on that same test?
Oh, I'd like to, but boy, I'd have to start. You'd come out to something similar, but it wouldn't be as level, as even. I just don't have a second and third one. I could probably dig one out, but I'm sure everybody's baking, so I better move this. Unless somebody wants to see the air bubble jets.
It actually visually looks like a little less of a little more of a tighter spray pattern, or not as
Here?
not as feathery, not as maybe it almost looks like less drift to me visually with the afro jets in the garden, but not what you're seeing.
Okay, that was we're going to have to get that chart up. Okay, the air bubble jet in a 15-mile-an-hour crosswind is drifting at 4%. At 40 psi, yeah. Well, they're actually pretty similar. One is drifting at 4%, the other is drifting at 5%. This is drifting a little bit more. You're right. Well, you know your spray patterns. So they're quite similar. Now the other series of that is their twin system. It is also air induced, okay? So a little less drift. And their twin system, no, I don't have that number.
I'll find it.
Is that a coarse or is it
It's a medium.
medium?
Yeah. It would have to be finer because it's split. Okay.
Could you use that as a narrow?
Again, it's got a what? It's got a. Well, I didn't even measure that. I'm not even sure. I think it's supposed to be 30 degrees, but it doesn't look 30. Again, that's the story with the Guardian nozzles. Is they all have pretty even patterns. Okay. So, like I said, with that bell curve, it's not as wide. It's more. It's a lot narrower. But when it comes to twinning nozzles, boy, I tell you, you can twin anything you want, all right? By just buying these adapters, okay? So, I mean, and they become actually very bulky when you do twin them. You can get into twin systems that are a lot smaller because they don't actually split the nozzle. They actually use one orifice, and then the water splits. Like some of these European designs, the turbo drop, the turbo T-jet twin, okay? Is there an advantage to splitting it? Only when you have to. I mean, no, there isn't any advantage to splitting it. If you look at the chart, ooh, that's bad, eh? We didn't have this breeze yesterday, so. If you look at the chart, anytime you twin something, you're going to get an increase in drift, okay? Because you're splitting the flow, all right? So it can be a 40% increase in drift, or it can be up 80%, depending on the nozzle and the pressure, okay?
Why do you want to split it?
Well, that live demonstration is going to show why we want to split it, okay? We'll leave that for that, okay? You're stealing my thunder.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was nothing ahead of it.
Oh. Okay, the other nozzle we're going to look at is on that live demonstration is Greenleaf's what they call the dual fan system. Okay, I can't actually put it on a patternator only because it's got such a steep angle. The front nozzles are spraying at 10 degrees forward, and the rear tips are spraying at 50 degrees back. Okay. The turbo drop twin or dual fan systems or twin systems are actually pretty neat. If you know anything about the Greenleaf nozzles, they all come with a venturi, okay, and it's separate from the tip itself. All right, this is their ordinary nozzle, okay, with the venturi ahead of the tip, the spray tip. And what they've done, and they're the only ones who do that. Like I said, you can twin anything you want, hey? But really, the people that are just twinning anything they want haven't really done a lot of research in that area, okay? What the Greenleaf guys are doing is saying, okay, we're going 15 miles an hour forward. We need something heavier going backwards. We need more mass. So when you look at these nozzles, you'll find that the orange, remember, was a 0-1 tip. It's usually pointed forwards, okay, and produces a finer spray. And it's usually 110 degrees. And the rear tip is usually a size or two bigger. It's an 80 degree, it's producing a coarser drip spray. So if you look at this is a lot coarser than what the front is, okay? Because if you're traveling 15 miles an hour, you need some mass, you need some velocity to that drop it to hit that target, okay? Okay. And the last series of tips that we'll be looking at in that live demonstration will be the Very Target nozzle. This is how they look. That's the orange cap producing the fine spray. This is the yellow cap producing that medium spray, and the blue cap producing the coarse spray. We're also going to, on that sprayer, I believe we are going to have the green cap also. So that truck mount sprayer is going to have 4 sections to it, okay, about 5 foot sections, okay, and we're going to be going over some water sensitive cards with them. So you're going to see what happens with the fine all the way to the extremely coarse as it hits those targets. We were going to have some weed control plots here, but the crop canopy is much too high now for us to actually visually have a look at what kind of control we're getting in a crop situation. But one thing I should tell you about the Very Target nozzles, oops, is that this year and part of last year they have improved because there's been issues with the flow rate with these nozzles, okay? If you're getting the new nozzles or the new tips, if you're planning on getting these, make sure they have a white seal in them. All right, that's the new seal they're using. It's a little bit more flexible and doesn't stick that plunger. Because what was happening in the last couple of years was with these black seals, the older seals, the flow rate variations were getting up to 25–50%. Okay, we thought it was maybe used in certain products, like the DG products. But we thought, okay, we got to test another new set. And when we tested that new set, same results. And what we were thinking is there was quality control issues. All right. Just to be fair with everything, I don't even know where I got this from. What? Here? Here? Oh, this. Oh, yeah, we just went through that. That's the Greenleaf Turbo Drop Dual Fan. TADF for short, eh? LDX, LDA. What else is there? All right. Okay, just to be fair to Spraying Systems, that's another nozzle manufacturer, and they did some improvements to their old nozzles. Everybody's familiar with the turbo T-jet nozzle. I mean, that used to be the workhorse in the 1990s when high clearance sprayers and automatic range controllers were out there. Okay, it's the only thing we had that could spray at that range of speeds we were operating at. Okay, but the problem it had, there was a lot of drift with it. Okay, but it was much better than that extended range nozzle, which drifted twice as much. Spraying Systems extended range nozzle drifted about 20% in a 15-mile-an-hour wind. Okay. So what they've done, they've they made them air-induced, okay? So instead of calling these a TT, whoops, I'm not sure what's happening. Get it on this one. Okay, this is that turbo T-jet TT, as it's known, and this is its air-induced side of things, okay? So it's a lot coarser. As a matter of fact, all this spray is extremely coarse, okay? No matter what pressure you're going at. I think it's a little bit too coarse. What you may want to do is use the extended range version of it, which is this one right here. So as a matter of fact, this spray here and the air bubble jet and that Guardian air induced are kind of the same. The numbers are very, very close, all right? I think this air-induced nozzle here is much better than their original, okay? I always felt this was too coarse. So that's all I've gotten with the new nozzles, okay? So we're going to see a live demo now with these nozzles. The first demonstration is going to be with the Guardian series nozzle, okay, plus the Greenleaf, okay. So I believe on the extreme left, as he's going this way, we're going to have the extended Guardian, and then we're going to have the air-induced, and I believe we're going to have the twin. And in the extreme right, we're going to have this purple nozzle right here, okay? The Greenleaf, all right? And we're going to look at what kind of coverage we get. I've got this set up, and normally when I look at droplet deposition, I like to have about 3 of these little trees, and I put it in between the 20-inch spacings, and I've made them such that it's tough to get total coverage on all of these leaves, okay? I've got the white stands, I've got the cards, especially the vertical cards, I've got them parallel with the boom. I've got the orange stands, I've got them parallel with the nozzle alignment. You know, there's about a 12 to 15 degree tapered angle when you're on the spray itself versus the boom itself. But because I didn't put the third set of trees out, and they're actually the opposite. So what's happening here is the sprayer will be always against it. So that was actually a very easy target to hit for the spray. So I got the 2 worst case scenarios. All right, so I'm going to wave him on. If you guys can gather on that track there, just over, like Ken himself, he's got this auto rate controller GPS system he put on. He also put a self-steer system on there. He's happier than hell with it, and he wanted to demonstrate it at this school. He's going to be, oh, I hope he's going 60 psi. Oh, rats. Yeah. I believe he's going about 9 miles an hour. The pressure is going to be about 70 psi. And he's not steering. Well, he's proud of that.
Yeah, he sure is like a baby, man.
Okay, so if you can just come over here. Okay, these are the Guardian low drift extended nozzles. So if you look at the horizontal cards, I mean, you got a lot of coverage. Horizontal leaves have never been an issue to cover. Okay, it's the grassy weeds that have been an issue. Okay, and I believe we're pointing these rearward. Okay, so as he's going this way, because it's spraying to the rear, we've got coverage on the back side of the leaf. Okay, and I believe if we put this on and we even got coverage on the. Yeah, we got coverage actually in both directions. A little bit less on the leaves that are parallel with the boom. Okay. What do we got here? We've got these are the Guardian low drift air induced, the LDAs. Okay, we've got them alternating. Okay, one is pointing forwards, the other one's pointing backwards. And so he's going this way. We were supposed to get more coverage, but we didn't. I'm not sure what happened here. Usually, when you're alternating them, you get coverage on both sides. But I randomly placed these trees here. Like, I don't know exactly where it is in between the 20 inches. Okay. But there's nothing wrong with the coverage going pointing forwards. It would have been nice to start up with the flat fan nozzles. And we'll see that in a minute. And these are the Guardian twins, okay? So we got nothing again on the leaves that are actually facing and going away from the sprayer. Again, nothing here, but we got more there, okay? But the fronts are covered. Now, yeah, I'm not sure what happened. Wasn't he supposed to be going 9 miles? Does that seem like 9 miles an hour?
No. The first time it did, not this time.
Okay, starting from here, actually we'll start from here because this is the right direction. So he's going this way. And these are the orange caps, which is a fine spray, okay? And you can see that it's fine. We've got some coverage there, and very little there, okay? These are going straight down. This is the orange cap, the very target orange cap, a fine spray, okay? And if you look at what's actually getting on, it's very, very fine. Why? It's swirling. We probably got a little bit of inversion here. It's with this heat, so that those little fine drops just stay up there, right?
Hang up like dust.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, these are the blue caps, I think. No, the yellow caps, which is a medium spray, and you can see it's a little coarser than those there, okay? And again, the only thing you'll see on the back side is a very fine spray, so, okay. And we've got nothing. A lot less here. So if you look at what's happening with nozzles that are directed straight down, we're getting a lot less on the vertical cards than we did with all the ones that were pointing on an angle. That's what I want you to take away from here, okay? So. These are the blue tips, blue caps, and you can see it's a lot coarser. This is a coarse spray compared to the other two, okay? Again, there's some here, and on the back side there's none. This is what typically you should expect. It's a coarser spray. It's got less fines, okay? So as we saw over there, only the fines were getting on, only because they were getting hung up and probably pushed to the spray.
Are those fines not hitting the backside more because of the swirl?
And that's another thing, yeah. I mean, anything that's good, yeah, air currents move the spray. And that's why I don't really like the fines, because they can just go anywhere, okay? So really, basically, this spray here in windy conditions is great to have. That spray there, which is the medium, for other spraying applications, for most of your spraying applications. Like, it's been so windy, except for this past week, I go with these all the time. I know this kind of coarseness scares people. And this is the very coarse droplets. You can see there's blotches, and again, on the front side there's some coverage, and a lot less in the back. And the only thing you'll see in the back is, again, the very fine. Okay, it's not the actual spray. It's just the fines that's misting around the machine and around the spray. All right.
What make was this one?
All these four were the very target nozzles, the variable rate nozzles that we were talking about right at the start there, where they had that low pressure curve.
Yep.
The other thing I should mention with these very target nozzles is don't expect a lot of pressure. Okay, the only time you'll always be around that 30 to 45 psi range. To get about 45 to 60 psi, you're going to have to be going like 15, 20 gallons per acre and 15, 18 miles an hour to get that extra pressure. Okay, get used to the low pressures with these types of nozzles. Okay. Now, Ken, that's about enough. We were going to pre-burn Roundup Ready canola with these two sets of nozzles, but there's not really enough effect there to see a difference, is there?
On the latest stuff we sprayed?
Yes.
Not really.
Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. What we wanted to show with that is the type of control we were going to get with
Everybody's
these.
going night spraying tonight anyways.
Is that right? They're getting some good results there?
Recreational night spraying.
Oh, okay.
Let your neighbors feel first.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I had. As we could stop at that panel again, and if you guys want to look at a chart Tom Wolf did on forward and rearward spraying, it really shows how much more droplets, how much more coverage you can get by having an angle to a nozzle.